Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this LinkedIn Live with me, Justin York, where this afternoon we're going to be talking for the next 20-25 minutes about data criticality, data quality, and you, because there is a real impact on people when we think about criticality and quality and the links with ecosystems. Lots of organizations talk about improving their data quality. Nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely right, and things that people should be doing. But part of the problem is that they are talking about doing this, improving their data quality, without really knowing what it is that matters the most. Because, as we know, not all issues, not all data is equal. Some will be more important, some will be more impactful than other sets of data. And if we spend far too much time looking at things that maybe are not as important, what happens is that the whole issue set gets diluted and the impact and effect that they have. So it's all very well having the visible and noisy issues that are around all the time, and they're getting all of the attention. So the big noisy things, people jumping up and down, why hasn't this been fixed yet, gets the attention. But there's a risk that some of the critical issues may remain hidden. And we don't want them to remain hidden. We want to see them because they are the most important to us. Now, there is a link between data quality and data criticality. And we need to know things like which key decisions depend on the criticality of the data. Which are the big things that the leaders are doing, the big decisions that they take that depend on that data? We have to know which of the data is affecting customers. So, for example, we need to understand, yes, if we've got names and addresses and all that kind of stuff, and if somebody has ordered something from us, then we need to be able to dispatch it. Even if we're sending it digitally, we still need to know their email address. But what other data might there be? For example, we might be holding some sensitive personally identifiable information. And maybe that is an even bigger effect, a bigger risk, more critical. And so we need to understand that. We have to know which data is affecting regulatory reporting and/or compliance issues. Because if we are in a financial services organization, for example, let's take insurance, then regulatory reporting requires us to report on things like Solvency II, which is fine, but we have to make sure we understand which data is supporting that. Because if we're spending huge amounts of time on stuff that's not that important, then we could be missing the stuff that's actually building that report up. And what about internal financials, internal reporting? When we think about sending numbers to the board, thinking about various, I don't know whether it's sales or whether it's profit and loss or whatever it is that goes up to the board, how accurate are those things? And maybe we also need to think about the risk that's involved with this stuff. Which data is carrying the most risk for us? And what about if it's late or it's wrong? Because if data is late, then we might end up falling foul of regulatory reporting or compliance because we haven't put something in when we should have done. And if something is just plain wrong, it's got a real quality problem, then that's going to affect things like key decisions. It could affect things like customers or regulatory reporting or compliance. And the other thing that we have to understand when we think about our link between data quality and criticality is who owns the decision to act. It's really important that we understand who is that is going to make the decisions, apply the resource, remove the blockers. But not all data quality issues carry the same levels of risk. Some things are just plain annoying. Something pops up and it's something that's a field that's incorrect, but it actually doesn't do very much. It's not really impacting anything like customers or reporting. It's not affecting regulatory decisions or compliance or anything like that. They're just annoying little things, and we spend some time fixing them, manually fixing stuff, but they don't actually carry any risk. So we need to understand which things carry the levels of risk. Some will carry rework. Rework's just a waste of time. It's annoying, it's an irritation. Why do we have to keep reworking stuff? Why do we have to keep on top of these things when they should be just coming out of the systems? If we've done our work correctly and done the root cause analysis, then they should just be coming out of the systems already fixed. We shouldn't see these same problems all the time. And then we have to think about some issues are going to affect decisions. They may delay decisions, because if we've got an important decision to make and the data we find out is incorrect, or we don't have a high enough level of confidence and trust in it, then we have to wait until we've checked it out, double checked it, 5 people have checked the spreadsheets, we've looked at source systems, whatever it is. It's going to delay those decisions that we need to make. And let's think about customers again. So when we think about risk and data quality issues and risk, well, we might be contacting customers, for example, where somebody has revoked their consent. So we shouldn't be contacting them in the first place. Or maybe we've got incorrect address details. So somebody orders something and we just send it to the wrong place. That just annoys customers, and there is risk around doing that. Some of these things may expose us to regulatory reporting risk. So if the data is late, there's a risk because the regulators expect their reports on time. If the data is wrong, we could be submitting some reports that are just not correct. The values are not right. And all that will do is give us more exposure to the regulators, and they take more of an interest in us. So quite a lot of these data quality issues will also undermine trust in the data. The less people trust data, the more they check it, the more they rework it, the more they go and look at other sources to see if it stays the same, or is it different in any way, in which case we have to triple check and then have a look at something else. But of all of those things, whether it's annoying, rework, exposure to regulatory risk, etc., which is which? And that's the problem, is that we don't really know which is which. So one thing that we do know, particularly if you've been around the data business for a while, you will know that not every, the loudest issues or the noisiest issues are not always the worst ones that exist in your organization. There are a great many that stay silent. Organizations will use all sorts of dimensions, accuracy and completeness and consistency and uniqueness and timeliness, all these data quality dimensions, which I have nothing against at all. They absolutely are required. But sometimes the quality score that we get from those things is just not enough. So for example, if we think about criticality and we've got some low impact data, but we've got it at 96% accuracy, we think brilliant, 96% accuracy. But if it doesn't impact anything, there is no critical impact from that data, then 96% accuracy is pretty much meaningless. We could get away with 40%, for example. But then we might have something that's got real high criticality that runs at about the same level, about 96%. But in that case, we're missing 4% of something that we should be getting towards because it's real high impact data. I'll give you an example. When I was working with the RAF on fast jet platforms and the magic engineering system that they had, we were told by somebody quite senior that we were wasting our time, we wouldn't find anything. So we went away and looked, and they were suitably glib when we came back. They sort of went, "Oh, you didn't find anything there. See, I told you." And we said, on the contrary, we found quite a lot of things. And we found things like more takeoffs than landings, which I know, given fuel efficiency and all that kind of stuff, we can stay up there a bit longer, but can we have more takeoffs than landings? And the answer to that question is no. It was a critical high impact item, and the accuracy should have been greater than it was. But it wasn't, because we weren't looking at the right things. Nobody thought that we needed to spend more time checking on that. So DQ tells you what might be wrong. Data quality is going to tell you what might be wrong. Criticality is going to tell you how much it matters. So we need to understand then, if we're thinking about data quality and we're going to talk about things like it's telling us it's wrong, which is fine, criticality tells us what matters, well, what makes the data critical? Because we have to think about material impact on the business. So if I take that aircraft example, the material impact on the business, if the undercarriage collapses when it lands because all the data's out of kilter, and it shouldn't have had so many landings before it went into overhaul, then we've got the potential of losing an aeroplane, we could lose crew, we could lose all sorts of things. There's a huge business impact to losing an aeroplane. But we have to think about impact in terms of customers, for example. If we've been a financial services organisation, then we might be interested in things like anti-money laundering or politically exposed people. And we might be interested in what is their source of wealth? Where do they get their money from? So we have to think about that. That type of data is likely to be critical because we do not want to get ourselves involved with people who are involved in money laundering and that type of stuff, because that will invoke not only a fine, but it will also bring us to the attention more of the regulators. And maybe in terms of business impact, we have to think about regulatory reporting, because if we get our reports wrong or the data we're using is incorrect, then that just gives us more exposure to the regulators. And they say, well, if they've got it wrong this time, have they done it before? We'll need to check everything a lot more closely next time around, because if we don't do that, then we won't be able to trust the numbers that they're putting in. Even if we think about internal reporting, financial reporting, those numbers that we send to the board, if they're making a decision or they're going to publish those numbers and they're going to think about dividends and that type of thing, then those numbers have to be correct. There is a real business impact to those things if they are not right. And we have to think about risk management. Some data will carry huge amounts of risk. AML, anti-money laundering, for example, politically exposed people, carries a lot of risk with it. We have to be really diligent when we're thinking about that. That has a real business impact on us if we don't understand the risk and mitigate it or reduce it. And what about leadership dashboards? Leadership dashboards has an impact on these things because they get their dashboards and they might be making quite high-powered decisions based on the data that is contained in that dashboard. And if it's all wrong, then they might be spending millions of pounds doing something that's a flawed decision before it's even taken because the numbers are not correct. We might also have to think about monitoring in terms of compliance. We have to make sure that we're following the rules, GDPR, Solvency II, whatever it is, whatever set of rules we're following, we have to think about compliance monitoring. Because if we're not doing it properly, if we're not having enough monitoring on the real critical data, and we're spending more time monitoring stuff that's not so critical, then we end up missing, potentially, some fairly important things. And what about AI and analytics and things like that? Because the business impact of those things is pretty high. Analytics, certainly, because we might go back to which type of issue is it? Is it a rework? Is it just an annoying thing? Are we going to delay a decision? Can we get the dashboard out? And if we think about AI, the thing with AI is we need to have really, really strong data foundations. We need to be able to have trust and confidence in our data, because if we don't have that, then how are we going to be able to trust remotely the answers that come out of our models? So we have to really think about these things in a way where we think about business impact. And when we think about impact, we have to think about where is the pain actually felt in an organization? When something goes wrong, where is the pain really, really felt in that organization? So there is that link between criticality and business impact. We have to understand when we think about this data, we have to think about what decisions are being taken on it. Not are they high power, not are they not really relevant, type decisions. What decisions? We have to know the actual decisions, and we need to know which data is used for those decisions. Because when we know that, then we can understand what the criticality or the impact is of that decision. Because if somebody's trying to decide who's filling up the coffee machine this week, it's not actually that bad. If somebody's trying to decide what level of dividend we're going to pay shareholders, that's probably a little bit more critical if the numbers are not correct. We have to know who is using the data and what are they using it for. This is another one of the things I talk about quite a lot, because not everybody should be able to see or access every single piece of data. So we need to know who is using the stuff and what they're using it for. So for example, if we are creating our report for Solvency II, we might have a value in there, I'll call it total sales. But that has been created specifically and calculated specifically for Solvency II. Just because somebody else is creating a dashboard doesn't mean that they should just use total sales. Oh, there's a value, that looks like the one I want to use, I'll just use that, because it may not be the right piece of data to use, because it may have been calculated differently. So they have to find out whether it is or not usable for their purpose. We need to understand what processes this data is going through. Which internal processes are we using this data in? Now, I know there's lots of people that will say, we've got a workaround for that, or a shortcut, or we've got sticking plaster, whatever it is. But we need to know the data that moves through the internal processes and which of that data is critical, because when we know the level of criticality of the data, then what we can actually do is spend more time monitoring it and checking it and doing that type of thing. And what do we have to do if it's missing? So if data is missing, then we should be able to pick that up. And for criticality or more critical data, top high level criticality data, we should be monitoring more often, and we should notice almost immediately that the data is missing. And systems can help us with that. Tooling can help us with that. But some of this stuff is also going to impact operations. It may impact financial operations, because if we get the criticality, or we're using the wrong data, the data we are putting through hasn't been given the right level of attention in reports, financial reporting, regulatory reporting, that could affect our operations. Customers, there could be an impact operationally on customers, because we might end up with quite a significant loss of reputation if we're getting things wrong. If we're contacting people when they've revoked their consent to be contacted, for example, when we might end up in trouble with the regulators. The Information Commissioner might well be a bit uptight with us if we're doing that. And if we do it a lot, then that will be even worse. So there's lots of things that happen around criticality. And we have to consider that the data itself is critical because of what depends on it. So data in and of itself is just data. It just whizzes around inside the fiber. It moves around the systems. We take it out, we do stuff with it. But it's what depends on it that makes the big difference. Because if nothing depends on it, then we shouldn't be spending enormous amounts of time on it. Because if we do that, then we are wasting time on something else. But then we have to think about the people layer. Now, anybody that knows or follows me will know we talk about data ecosystems all the time. And criticality and quality is part of your data ecosystem. But underlying that and supporting that is your behaviors and habits ecosystem. These things are not abstract concepts. These things affect people. So data quality, criticality affects people. It affects leaders' decisions. I've spoken about this a couple of times already, but it affects leaders' decisions. They may make slower decisions because they're not sure, they don't have the trust and confidence in the data. They may not know which stuff is really critical and which stuff really isn't critical when they're looking at a dashboard. It may mean it affects the owners, the data owners, when they're prioritizing Which decisions do I have to take now? Which ones can I delay a little while? Which things need resource allocating immediately and which things can wait for a week or two? So prioritizing things will be affected, because if you don't know what's critical, then we could quite easily be spending quite a lot of time and effort on something that has no real bearing on anything. The data stewards, they will be raising their issues, right? They'll be raising the issues, and then they'll be saying, right, we've got that issue in, but if we don't know which things are critical, if we don't know which things carry the highest business impact, then we'll raise loads of issues, and we may decide to prioritize something that just isn't important. And data stewards will, if they don't see any action or they don't see things happening, they will probably stop raising issues. And what about the analysts that are creating the reports? The people layer, they get affected because they are the ones that are going to have to do the rework. They are the ones that are going to have to get that annoying field fixed, or maybe they will just do it themselves. They won't report it, they'll just fix it themselves. And there will be people in your organization that are manually correcting stuff, manually correcting spreadsheets, not just the analysts. People will be correcting things all the time. They'll have their copies of their spreadsheets. They'll be updating them. They'll be doing all sorts of interesting things. But a lot of time they'll be manually correcting things. And one thing that we do know is that human beings make mistakes, typos, all that type of stuff. And then we have to think about the compliance levels and the management of the risk, because it has to be quite important for the critical data that we are managing the risks associated with compliance. But we can all talk about these things, and we can all say, oh yeah, well, you know, I've got this, I've got that, I've done this, done that, which is all great. But what does good really look like? When we think about criticality and data quality, what does good really look like? And people, of course. Well, we will find things like data, critical data is clearly defined. We like everything to be clearly defined, but the critical data is the highest level. It's got the best definitions. So I use a definition of something like bi-weekly, which could mean, has two meanings. It has twice a week or once every 2 weeks. But we can't have a definition that says, oh, bi-weekly means once every 2 weeks or maybe twice a week, depending on the context. So we have to make sure that we have defined clearly what these things are. When we've done that definition, the data owners have agreed it and signed it off, then we have to make sure that we keep the data owners aware of the stuff that matters the most, the stuff that is the most critical. Because when we know that, data stewards will be able to know where they focus their effort the most. Where are they going to put the most of their time trying to get things done? And then all of the rules that we put in, when we think about data governance, we think about rules and data quality rules, well, they're linked to the impact that that data actually has. And we can prioritize issues by the value and the impact that they have, not the noise that is being created around them. And when we have criticality and we all recognize what it is, well, our data governance forums can actually look at things from the critical perspective. Those things get first. They make the decisions. They decide what they're going to remediate. They decide who's accountable. They decide who is going to allocate the resource to that, or which ones of them will allocate resource to those things. And we also can escalate the critical issues. We can raise the issues up faster. We can make sure that those things get to the top of the tree. And probably the most important thing about what good looks like is that the teams know why it matters the most. They need to understand why it is they should be more careful of certain pieces of data than others. Now, they should have a responsibility to maintain all of the data in good condition, but some of it will be more important than others, and we need to make sure they know that. So if you're trying to do data quality without understanding criticality, you may spread your effort far too thinly, and we may be missing critical things. And we shouldn't be asking, is our data good quality? Because that's not really a very good question to ask. What we should be saying is the data that matters good enough in our decisions, our processes, and our business outcomes? So that's it for this afternoon, the last 25 minutes or so. There's no live next week because I'm doing my 90-minute free interactive workshop on why doesn't your data governance land. If you're interested in coming to that, or you haven't registered yet, then send me a comment workshop link and I'll make sure I send you more details to that. It's on the 16th of July and it starts at 12:30 BST. So if you're registered, I will see you there. And otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your week.